Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Ask the Unfaithful. It's my honor to be with my great buddy, James Anir. James, how are you? Good, sir?
I am very well, doing a lot of really good introspective work lately with my new therapist and loving it. How are you, Sam?
I happen to do a lot of work with my own therapist and a coach as well, and it is a great honor to do what we do. Today, we're talking about something that is, man, pretty well talked about. There's been a lot of discussion about it. There's been some discussions out there that I don't know that they've been as spot on as today's going to be, but it's a topic that's kind of polarizing in the world of infidelity, and that's the topic of limerence. And so today we're going to give a little bit of our sarcastic kind of title to it. Limerence, when the unfaithful is in love with their affair partner. So, my good, great brother, what is limerence?
The person who defined it in psychological terms first, Dorothy Tenoff, what she said was limerence is an involuntary, obsessive state of mind that includes romantic fixation and a desperate need for reciprocation. So, like an intense obsession, it can feel euphoric and devastating all at once. An English way of saying that is, have you ever been completely consumed by thoughts of somebody else, even when you knew it was dangerous? By dangerous, I mean to your relationship that you're in. Have you ever felt like you're losing your mind over somebody who wasn't your partner? That's maybe a more humanistic way to connect with the idea. There are some key symptoms: persistent, intrusive thoughts about the other person. The other person in this case is called the limerent object. Okay, nice shrinky term there, but there's a reason for that. We're going to get to that. There also are, in those key symptoms, emotional highs from a perceived connection with this other person and lows from any disinterest or lack of reciprocation that you might get from that person. There's also idealizing that other person while ignoring their flaws. So, fantastical look of or view
Right.
of that person. Here's a really important part: there's an intense emotional dependence. Now, most people out there are going to go, well, I don't have that, so you need to look at that more, because that can look like a fear of rejection, high anxiety around that rejection, or not being able to be in touch with that person, or getting obsessive while you're not able to be in touch with that person. There's also this piece within this emotional dependence that you mistake it for love. Limerence mimics love, but it's actually most often rooted in fantasy and unresolved emotional needs. So that's a key statement. It is most often rooted in fantasy and unresolved emotional needs. So if we talk about fantasy, really important here, because we talk about a lot of things like you're watching porn a lot, therefore you have a relationship with porn. We're getting high off of another human being. That's another way to look at this. So make no
Right.
mistake that you are, if you're in this, you are in a relationship with fantasy. And therefore, you're disconnected from your primary relationship with your partner.
So, in real world scenarios, it oftentimes, and this is what trips a lot of us up, it starts innocently. I mean, there could be some grooming behavior, sure, but it doesn't just start out all the time with this infatuatory crystallization where we are just hooked. Starts out innocently, and then we feel like, man, this person just gets us. Like we just click, right? We have this feeling like, man, where has this person been all my life? Because forget about where I'm at. It just feels really good, this person. And then we start to replay conversations in our head. And then I've heard you say this before, and this is where I think it really makes us go, uh-oh. And that's when we start to light up every time we see their name or they text us, they call us, you name it. When we start to light up, we are in a danger zone. And that leads us into emotional affairs and limerence spirals. I love the verbiage limerence spirals. But first, give us a quick reminder on what an emotional affair is?
It's an investment basically outside of our primary relationship that actually threatens the intimacy and trust of that primary relationship at home. It's extremely intense, often more so, even much more so than physical cheating. That's not to make physical cheating small. I think we all know how big that is. So if we think about the emotional involvement being that much bigger, and that is because of that deep emotional bond that's being formed with really the fantasy of somebody, but somebody other than our primary partner. This all happens because of this perfect storm. So I'll break this down. Fuel. We need fuel. And that's going to be, we talk about childhood wounds a lot. We talk about unmet needs and emotional neglect. Now, that doesn't have to be from childhood. That can be in our young adolescence, our later adolescence, our young adulthood, anytime that there is that emotional neglect. That is from outside because we're always looking to have that met from the outside. Here's the key. Now we need oxygen for that fuel to basically burn once it's ignited, which we'll get to. And that is maybe there's current relational stress. Maybe there's an emotional disconnection with our primary partner for whatever reason. We don't really have to decide on a reason. And there's a key piece here, emotional self-neglect. I talked about outside emotional neglect earlier years, right? Now, not necessarily childhood, but that young adulthood. Now we've got this emotional self-neglect. I'm not taking care of myself. And that's key because the answer to nearly all of our emotional problems is emotional self-compassion and care and
Yeah.
actual self-loving acts that are healthy, of course. Next, we have ignition. So we got the fuel and the oxygen, and now we need the flame. So what's the ignition? Anybody who comes along who triggers that fantasy or escape through, it could be validation, showing us compassion, some sort of thing that looks like nurturing, makes us feel needed, hits our self-esteem, gives it an ego boost, or that we actually matter, and that's really self-worth. So any of the messages that we don't feel like we're getting enough, which if it was lacking in childhood, it's always going to feel like we're not getting. So any of
And
those, and there can be a number of other ways that the fantasy can be triggered. Again, I keep talking about fantasy. Look, at the base of any of these relational issues that we talk about all the time, up to and including addiction, is fantasy. It's always
yeah,
based in fantasy and not reality.
because we want to escape. And part of the reason affairs are so addicting is, man, it was just easy, we would say, right? Well, yeah, of course. There's no mortgage, there's no bills, there's no mood swing, there's no kids, there's no responsibilities and pressures. Of course, it feels amazing because it's not real, it's an escape. But there is, and as brilliant as you are, I love when you break this stuff down. There is a neuroscience breakdown on limerence. And so, why don't you share a little bit about the neuroscience behind it? Because it's really quite intriguing. It's not just, oh, we just want to be limerent, but there's a whole lot going on behind the scenes neurologically, right?
There is, and I was told that I draw on my head too much, like use my fingers to draw on my head. And a lot of people are watching this on their phones, so they can't really see it. And then there are a bunch of people just listening, so they can't see it for sure. So I'm just going to describe it. Really, our brain responds to any kind of input with hormone releases, and that's the rewards that we get. Dopamine is our biggest one in this case. It's a reward chemical. It says, ooh, you know, that's good. That's great. And what that does is it actually makes us want more of that. So we're going to crave more contact with this person. And that contact doesn't actually have to look like, oh, I'm going to call or I'm going to text. It can actually look like in our head. Our fantasy that we engage with about being with that person is actually for our brain going to release that dopamine. Now, there's also an adrenaline or norepinephrine is the shrinky science
Hmm.
name. And what that's going to do is that's going to create excitement. It'll actually create sort of an anxiety, like an anxiety meaning, oh, I can't be in touch with that person. I can't contact them or I can't be with them. And that's going to make us want to do that more. And it's also going to make us hyper focus on them. When we hyper focus on them, Guess where our focus isn't? And
Right.
then next, oxytocin and something else called vasopressin. And that both of those are about connection. They influence bonding and attachment with that other person. Again, we can actually attach to fantasy. If you don't believe this, think about how therapists help you actually rework your attachment stuff with parents and things like that by using techniques like the empty chair technique. So you're actually doing that in your brain. It's not like you got dad sitting there and you're
Right.
actually having that conversation with him. You're changing your brain by imagining that that is happening. So it actually does do this, and that we can actually attach and bond to the fantasy itself. With that, and all of these hits that we want from those different chemicals that make us feel good, amp us up, connect us, we're going to look for more of those hits because that's how our brain works. It wants more of it. It wants more of the chocolate ice cream, more of the sugar, more of the candy, right? So we look for more hits like texts, like glances, like daydreams, just like a drug. And guess what? When we don't get it, when that limerent object, that other person isn't around, we're going to have what look like withdrawal symptoms of all things, agitation,
Yes.
depression, loss of focus.
It's interesting though, because oftentimes we're creative individuals. So we want to try and say, well, we can just be friends and let's just be friends. But tell us why just being friends doesn't work.
First of all, don't do it. But there's a reason. The brain, just like we've been talking about with fantasy, it can't differentiate between real and imagined reward. It's why, if you, especially betrayeds out there, can think about betrayal happened X number of years ago for some, and yet it feels like it was yesterday, especially when they're
Yeah.
triggered. And it's the same thing. The brain doesn't tell time well. So if I'm getting the reward because I'm with that person or I'm talking to that person or they give me a smile or whatever, versus me imagining it, well, it's actually going to create the same responses in dopamine, adrenaline, and oxytocin in the brain or connection in the brain. When we try to just be friends, that proximity or that closeness, whether it's by calling or by saying hi to the person or whatever, is going to keep this whole process or cycle alive. So it won't let our brain get away from the reward, I'm drawing on my head. It won't let us get away from those neural pathways in order to break them. If you've ever, stalked someone's Facebook in the middle of the night or wondered if they like a hobby like you do or how they like their coffee, I mean, it might be in limerence, right?
Yeah. Stalking Instagram profiles or Facebook profiles or just doing whatever you can to get that hit. Well, if we're thinking clearly, we can say, man, that's a problem. As we move into the difference between real, true love and limerence, what are some metrics to use to know the difference?
So here's one. Love is a choice. Limerence is generally speaking a compulsion. It's not necessarily that we absolutely have to, but it can get to that point. But it is like this pull, pull, and pull and pull. So that's one. Love is about this loving consideration of the other person and their well-being, but limerence is how the other person makes you feel. I feel so good when I'm around them versus how is that person feeling right now, whether I'm around them or not. So that's a big difference there. It doesn't mean that you can't feel good around the person you love. Of course you can. But the limerence really does settle in that piece about how it makes me feel. Love grows in a different way. It grows through time and experiencing difficulty and coming out of that together. Limerence cannot, as you referred to earlier, survive reality. It just can't. You bring all those other pieces of what real life is about, and it's gone. Some other key differences. I'm just going to give you verses here. Love versus limerence, selfless and giving versus self-centered and needy, a realistic view of the person versus idealized fantasy-based perception, Love grows slowly over time. Limerence burns hot and fast and then fades. Love acts in the best interest of the other. Limerence is driven by personal emotional highs. Love is based on trust, honesty, intimacy, versus limerence that's rooted in secrecy, shame, and anxiety.
Now, you made this connection the other day. I thought it was brilliant. And I've said it a different way, but the way you said it is so much better. You said there's a difference between a soulmate and a wound mate. Talk about a wound mate.
I'm going to give credit where credit is due, because as brilliant as you make me sound, that's actually from the Pearls, Dr. David Pearl and his wife Ruth Pearl. So limerence will often feel like, oh, she's my soulmate or he's my soulmate, but it's actually usually what they call a wound mate, which is someone who's activating our deepest emotional wounds. So it's a trauma bond, not a connection or a love bond, right?
Mm,
So trauma bonds will often feel like deep romantic connections, but they're really rooted in those unresolved wounds. A wound mate is somebody who's going to unconsciously mirror or activate our emotional wounds, often parts that we didn't get what we needed in childhood. Those are wounds.
yeah,
Okay, so they activate that. So they might make you feel instantly seen or deeply connected, not because they know you. There's the trick. Oh, they really get me. No, they don't. It's because our wounds and their wounds recognize each other.
right.
There's usually some sort of magnetic pull, a kind of emotional urgency. I need you. You complete me. I've never felt this way before. And that bond can feel really intoxicating, but it is based in fantasy, not reality. The relationships are frequently intense, but also unstable, inconsistent, painful. Truly, I'm just going to say this straight, you're not falling in love. You're falling into an old pattern that's really just dressed up in new clothes. I think this sums it up really well. It's a quote. I can't find the person who said it. It's like you're trying to finally win the love you didn't get as a child, but from someone who resembles the person who hurt you.
It doesn't have to necessarily remind you. I know some people, especially the unfaithful, are very quick to go, but she or he doesn't remind me. It doesn't matter. Limerence is limerence. If you go on down this list, we obviously sometimes are looking for the ways that we're an exception, and there can be some narcissism in our desire to be an exception and be so different. Or we could just go, perhaps I have a problem. Perhaps there's an issue here to ask ourselves if this person didn't validate you or nurture you or celebrate you or make you first, would you still want them? That's a great question to identify on whether or not you're in limerence or whether you're in love. So if there's unfaithful that are listening and they're like, okay, you got me, James. You got me, Sam. Maybe there's betrays that are like, this is my partner. So what can the unfaithful do?
The neurochemical fog is going to lift. However, we don't want to wait around for that, because that's between 6 and 36 months. That's 6 months to 3 years before that will lift and then clarity can return. So that's not going to be the wake up call that we need, right? We need to be, hopefully, this podcast is the wake up call. Hopefully, you've got another wake up call that's going to go, okay, I need to look at this. So, one of the things we have to remind ourselves consistently, I don't care if you get, a Sharpie and write it across your forehead. Remember, it isn't love, it just feels like it. That neurochemical storm is so powerful that it creates this fog. All those hormones we talked about create a fog, and those override morality, logic, and even memory neurologically. That's amazing that it can actually replace memories. So, how do we go about it? Bolo, man. Be on the lookout for early warning signs. Here's the first one. When you start vilifying your partner and rewriting who they are, even. I did this with Sharon. I made her the enemy, right? I made her out to be controlling and such and such and such. And it just was the opposite of the truth, but I believed it. I actually sold it to myself. I gaslighted myself into that. Here, I'll just list them like this. If you're justifying secret contact, if you're fantasizing about another life, if you're rewriting the story of your marriage or relationship that you're in, those are going to tell you that, ruh-roh, I need to look at this because those are the early warning signs. So then we got to break the spell because that's what it is. It's like we're under some sort of spell,
Yeah,
magical spell that's keeping us there.
definitely.
It's within us, right? It's not really the other person doing that. It's that fantasy spell. So we got to break it. And we talked about the can't be friends. No contact with that person, period. Sometimes this can be difficult. No friendship, no lurking online. Where it can be difficult, and I'm not saying it won't be difficult anyway to break it, but where it can be even more difficult is if that person's like at work. You have to set up boundaries. That's going to be much harder to do. So you're going to have to work that harder, and we'll get to how you can help yourself with that. But there is this thing that we have in the S programs, the 12-step programs. It's called the 3-second rule. The 3-second rule is this. We have 3 seconds to shift from the fantasy to reality. The deal is we can't sit in the fantasy for the 3 seconds because the process of the brain, Limerent Spiral, is 1/20th of a second.
Mm.
So that's 60 times we could have done that in that 3 seconds. The 3 seconds means I'm going to shift immediately and I'm going to work that and work it and work it. And in about 3 seconds, that's actually going to take me into a whole other mindset. The fantasy will have abated unless I re-engage with it. It can be unconscious. It can just pop into your head, but you got to deal with it right then. So 3-second rule. Don't hang around with it for 3 seconds or it's not going to work. Next one, getting help. We talk about this all the time. Yes, I know I'm a therapist and coach, and you're a coach, but it isn't about, self-aggrandization or whatever the freaking word is, right? It's about wanting for you to get the help that you need because having a therapist or a coach is going to help you with self-awareness. And
Yeah,
that's key to be aware of what's happening inside you, what your fantasies are, what's going on inside your head. And that's going to lead you to, okay, now I can go from my feeling into my thought process and I can understand what that affair helped me avoid emotionally. And my therapist or my coach is going to help me understand that. I'm going to be able to identify childhood wounds, where this stuff might have come from, or stuff that happened during my life before this started going on, attachment issues, or any kinds of traumas that are fueling the pattern. Remember, we talked about fuel, oxygen, and ignition. And then accountability, that can be the therapist or the coach. And it's really important to have somebody else that isn't our spouse or our partner so that they can walk with us, share our process with them, and they're going to be able to point out areas where they fell down in this process. So it's really important for them to have had some experience in this. The next piece. This is one that doesn't get talked about. That is de-romanticizing that person. So we do this by intentionally identifying flaws in that person. Oh, wow, they complain a lot, or they've got this going on, or they've got that going on. It sounds horrible to pick apart somebody else, but it's so important because we've got to bring that into that reality and out of fantasy, looking for the red flags in that person. Whatever those red flags might be, we've got to reality check that person. And again, it sounds really horrible, but if it's what can save you, you got to do it. Because if
right.
you save you, then you have a chance of helping your partner heal and saving your relationship. Speaking of, make sure that your betrayed knows that this was not about them not being enough, that it was about something that needed fixing in you. Now, of course, that tells you got to be able to look at that and own it. We might get a couple of mean comments off of that, but it is true. We wouldn't be where we are without having taken that hard look at ourselves. When we did that, we could then see, oh, that wasn't our partner's fault. That wasn't theirs. I might have said that, but it turns out that was my excuse to allow myself to keep self-soothing in an improper and unhealthy way. Then, as things begin to progress, and this might be more for the couple, and we'll talk about that another time, but using the lessons from Limerence as a catalyst to deep emotional healing and moving forward. So, really, in terms of our own recovery, we can look at where did all that happen and how did that happen? And we can hook into that and go, I don't want that. I don't want that to happen anymore. So I'm going to look at this and I'm going to figure out with help how to, instead of staying in fantasy, move toward actual fulfillment, which means I'm going to choose mature love. And mature love is what we described as I'm going through trials and tribulations with this person together and collaborating. And we came out on the other side. This is real connection. True intimacy begins when two people show up honestly, doing their own inner work to understand themselves as well as the couple's work. So, showing up honestly. Your partner's been showing up honestly, and it's time to own the reality of this limerence. And then that's going to allow you to show up honestly with them.
I think it's a fascinating discussion that hinges upon the unfaithful being real with themselves. Wouldn't you agree? Maybe they're struggling to be real with themselves, but if they can find the right person to support them, therapist or coach, pastor, what have you, that's been trained, that's an expert, I think they need that to get honest with themselves.
It's very hard to do on your own because where's your check against that, right? I can do a reality check, but outside of something like this that you've just heard, who's going to help you see where you're gaslighting yourself again? We do it all the time. We gaslight constantly, gaslighting ourselves constantly. And so we need somebody neutral to help us with that reality check.
And I think that's part of the reason unfaithfuls won't get help is they know what they're doing is wrong and they don't want to have to face the music.
Yeah.
They don't want to have to confront the fact that perhaps I'm actually in a little bit of a fantasy land. Perhaps I'm trying to escape. But
Yeah.
if you're not willing to confront it and at least talk about it, then that's denial. So if you feel so strongly about this relationship or this situation, why not bring somebody in who's an expert that understands how to talk you through it, right?
And can be objective and see it for what it is, especially somebody who's trained, obviously, in this. But also, it really helps if they've gone through it because
I was
then,
just going to say that. Exactly, because we're not going to shame you. Why would we shame you for doing what we have probably far surpassed you in doing anyway? And that's the beauty of you and I being able to do, and so many other people who've been unfaithful, male and female, who are doing awesome work out there. We celebrate you, and some of them are doing fantastic. We are not the only ones, but I'll never forget the day I expressed some frustration with a client. And I remember somebody saying to me, what's that triggering inside of you? And I was like, grumble,
wow,
grumble, grumble. And then I had to realize I was that guy. You know what? For a few moments, I had kind of lost a sense of humility. And I was like, let's remember where you've been, Sam. Let's remember the nuclear disaster that your life brought about. So that was a good little teaching moment for me. So if they want, maybe you're the person, maybe you and Sharon are someone that they can reach out to say, look, we're in this horrendous situation. My spouse is involved with somebody else, and I'm just trying to get him or her to get help. If they want to do that, how do they find you?
our website is us.com. And they can also email info@hopeforus.com. And that would get them in touch with Gail, who is our office manager, and she can answer a bunch of questions and potentially set up a conversation between us and get in touch with you.
Well, you can reach out to me at samshealingpodcast@gmail.com. And I love what we do. And for all of you unfaithful, if you have the guts to listen to these, listen, we get you. We've been there. You're never going to hear judgment, shame, or condemnation from us. For you betrayed, our hearts go out to you. James and I live very well in a filter of our past choices. We understand the damage that we have caused and have had to do a lot of work around that. And so We want you to know that this is a safe place, that the betrayed is never going to be blamed, is never going to be attacked or shamed. Look, at the end of the day, we want you to find help from someone who's an expert. And if you want to reach out to us and email us, you can reach out to us at asktheunfaithful@gmail.com. We will see you next time on Ask the Unfaithful.